Welcome to the webinar. The title of this session is The Power of Storytelling, and we're very lucky today to have Chris Tomlin from our friends at Buffalo 7, who's going to be presenting for us today. And I've had the pleasure of a little sneak peek of this session, and so I know it's going to be really great for anybody that either prepares or runs their own presentations. So again, I've seen a few more people are joining now. So before I hand over to Chris to introduce himself and Buffalo 7 properly, please make sure you get onto the Vevox app in order to really participate in this session. Chris has got some great stuff to talk about, and I'm sure you're going to have some questions for him that he'll take at the end. So go to vevox.app and then type in the meeting ID, which again is 121-222-717. Okay, I can see we've got quite a few people coming on now, so I'd like to hand over to Chris to take us through. Thanks very much.
Hi, thanks very much. Welcome everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. So this is utilising the power of storytelling to engage audiences. So yeah, I can see quite a lot of people are joining us. Some of them I know, some of them are new, so welcome. Let me tell you a little bit about Buffalo 7. So you may not know exactly who we are, or you may not be aware of any of our work. So we're a specialist presentation design agency. We consider ourselves specialists as we've spent over a decade basically refining our process, which is more than making PowerPoint presentations look pretty. It's more about working with some of the biggest and most reputable companies in the world to tell their stories through amazing presentations. We always think that whether you're a small startup or a multinational organization, everybody creates presentations. They're such a fundamental part of everyday working life. And that's probably why you're all here, to find out a few more tips and tricks to make your presentations a bit better. What you can see running on the screen there, these are just a few of the brands that we've worked with, and some of the examples of the PowerPoint presentations, or mainly PowerPoint presentations, that we make. So all of this is entirely done in PowerPoint, no video editing or any skullduggery like that. We're specialists in each area, from storytelling, which is the area that I work in, to design, to our developers who kind of create all these incredible decks for our clients to use in front of their audiences. So let's move on from there. You're getting an idea of the kind of stuff that we do. So I'm Chris Tomlin. I'm Communications Director and Head of Storytelling at Buffalo 7. My role essentially comes right at the beginning of a project. I tend to go to see clients to really understand who they are, who their audience is, and understand their requirements. It's about understanding what their key messages are, their goals for their presentation, and ultimately what they want to get out of it. So it's about working with our clients to create stories and give them a bigger impact. So I'd like to share a few of my storytelling techniques with you so that you can use them in your own presentations. I'm going to break this down into three pretty simple areas. Excuse me. It's the power of storytelling, why it's so important. The second part is why it actually works, getting into the science behind it a little bit. And then the third part is how you can apply it to your own presentations to give you some practical takeaways that next time you're working on a presentation, perhaps you can think about the structure and the narrative in a different way that will help you get that impact. So, who would like to make 6,200% profit? That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? It's one of those statistics that I must have just made up. Well, in fact, no. Storytelling can help you increase your returns by 6,200% versus raw data alone. And I've got some proof to help demonstrate that. So some of you may have heard of the significance object experiment. It's a storytelling experiment that was set up back in 2009, where a couple of journalists set out to find out exactly how they could quantify the power of storytelling. So they went to charity shops and they bought 200 items, any old junk really. You can see there a toy plane, an old bucket, a cat mug, the kind of taps that you find tucked away in the corner of charity shops. And they paid, well, it was actually less than $1 for each of these items. So it was a total of $129 for 200 items. And this is where it gets interesting. They asked 200 authors, so famous authors like William Gibson was one of them, to create a fictional, emotional short story to go with each of these 200 items. And then they took that item and that story, put them together and listed it on eBay to see what would happen. And in total, the 200 items sold for over $8,000, which is over 60 times what they initially paid. So that's that 6,200% profit, which if you can find that kind of return anywhere else, then I'd be very happy to talk to you afterwards. The point of all this really is that stories have power. So let's have a look at why stories are so powerful. So we've done some research with cognitive psychologists, and we know that information is 20% more memorable when it's delivered as a story, because it's about taking the audience on a journey and introducing them to new and exciting concepts. And critically, it helps people to engage with and remember the information they're being given. And if it's done right, it can change their behaviors at the end. So if you're looking to encourage somebody to think a different way or to buy a different way, then storytelling is absolutely key to that. So this is the problem most presentations have, is that they're rubbish. Let's face it. Delivering data can be pretty dry, pretty complex and pretty laborious. I'm sure that lots of you looking at this today have sat through lots of terrible presentations and are wondering, how can I get these slides after slide of charts and data and readable text to be more interesting? And you're probably also aware that the last time you sat through one of those tedious PowerPoint presentations, you didn't actually come out remembering anything, which is kind of a waste of everybody's time. But then again, companies and people need presentations, because otherwise, how are you going to explain to people what it is that you're proposing to them? So this is where storytelling is so important. This is where you can get the edge. If you can transpose your business messaging into compelling stories, it's a formidable way to present information in a more engaging and ultimately a more human manner. So let's take a look at the science behind it a bit. So we know inherently that humans love stories. Ever since you were little kids, you'd have been read to, and then as you grow up, you may be watching TV or listening to podcasts or getting into films or getting into comics or books or whatever it is you do. Stories are a fundamental part of that, because stories change our brain chemistry. It releases oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, and dopamine, which are these magic brain chemicals, all the good stuff that makes you feel great. So when you go on a roller coaster, or you fall in love, or you eat some delicious chocolate, things like that, those same chemicals are being released. But as well as making you feel good, they encourage us to bond and to trust and to focus and even to remember more. So if you're delivering a story to somebody, number one, they're enjoying themselves, and number two, they're trusting you, engaging with you, and remembering what you're saying. So it helps us engage with that audience, so we can deliver information more easily, and they can understand more of what we're saying. So what is it about stories that help audience to engage more? And that's really, really easy to answer. Stories are simple and they're fun. And when things are easy to understand, they go in better and they get lodged better. So let's have a little bit more science. I wonder if there's any biologists or neuroscientists down there. I wonder if anybody knows what an amygdala is. I'll tell you. The amygdala is part of the limbic system. It's in your ancient reptile brain. And it's concerned primarily with emotions, and in particular, fear and self-preservation. So if you have any phobias, that's your amygdala kicking in to say, you're going to die unless you get out of this situation one way or another. The amygdala is there, or you've got two of them as it goes, but they are there to basically keep you safe. Anything that it detects is a threat to your safety there and then, it will kick in and help you to do something about it. And there's nothing you can do to overrule your amygdala. So it's keeping you safe from danger. And one of the things, bizarre as it seems, that it keeps us safe from is from losing too many calories. And one of the main ways it does this is it tries to figure out how many calories you're burning. And if you're thinking, you're actually burning calories. And the harder you think, the more you burn, which is why you may have sat in a marathon meeting and come out absolutely exhausted, and all you've really done is you kind of sat there and listened, or maybe pitched in with a few of your own points, but you feel exhausted at the end of the day. So your amygdala realizes this and think, I'm not sure how many more calories we've got in this body. If you keep thinking this hard, you might actually die, which causes the amygdala to panic. So cranial calorie burn, as it's known, normally it's about 320 calories a day for most people. But if you're thinking really hard, if it's your job to think really hard every day, so let's say you're a chess grandmaster, those guys can sit there running through complex tactics and scenarios in their mind, and they can burn up to 7,000 calories a day. So your amygdala's got a point. Unless you've got those calories in, if you burn all those calories, you're going to be in trouble by the end of it. So if you're thinking too hard, your amygdala starts to panic. It will sense that you're burning all these calories, concerned that you're going to die. So it stops you thinking. Simple as that. It's why you zone out, you shut down, you stop listening, you start thinking about something easier for your amygdala and your brain to handle, which reduces that cranial calorie burn. But you're not listening, you're not taking anything in, and that is that fabled death by PowerPoint. Which brings us to quite a serious aspect of this, death by PowerPoint. It's a phrase that you've probably all heard, but no one's really ever died from PowerPoint, have they? Well, back in 2003, you may remember the Space Shuttle Columbia. It launched, its crew of 7 went into low orbit, and just over a minute into launch, a big chunk, excuse me, a big chunk of spray-on foam insulation fell off the space shuttle and struck the wing. And it was going 9 times faster than a bullet, so this was a pretty big impact. Nothing happened there and then, but on February the 1st, 61,000 meters above Dallas at 18 times the speed of sound, Columbia attempted re-entry, and when it attempted that, it entirely disintegrated and the entire crew were lost. And then, of course, you know, absolutely terrible scenes. A 2-year investigation tried to figure out, why did this happen? How could something like this happen to, you know, NASA, a modern NASA spaceship? And the answer is that the PowerPoint did it. So this slide here, don't try and read it, it's terrible. It's the slide that Boeing engineers gave to NASA when they were discussing similar foam strikes. So the purpose of this slide that Boeing put together, Boeing engineers are the ones that made the space shuttle, it was supposed to tell NASA that the foam problem is a lethally dangerous design flaw. And so they gave them this slide, but as you may have already figured out, there's a lot of problems with this. Firstly, it's very boring. It uses lots of very woolly phrases that are really hard to understand. It uses words like sufficient and significant, which are really vague and open to audience interpretation. Look at the title in itself. This is in the largest font. It's right at the top. But in fact, this is the exact opposite of what this slide is trying to say. You've got a series of bullet points, which are really pretty much unrelated. They use different phrases for the different, for the same kind of word, that foam. They've got 3 or 4 different phrases for that foam, which is the most important part of it. And then right at the bottom, there's this final bullet point. It's the most important section of the entire slide. It's 100 words down, hidden away there, but it's really unclear. And basically what that last bullet point, or couple of bullet points, is saying is that the foam could damage a tile, cause catastrophic damage, and kill everybody on board, which is a big, big problem. So had this story been written and designed properly so that people can understand it easily, those lives may never have been lost. So less is more. You've certainly heard that phrase before. So when it comes to this kind of slide, I recommend changing it so you've just got very high level, this is what's going to happen, this is what we should do. But in fact, you can take it a stage further and just make it absolutely clear that this is a big problem. So we can say that storytelling saves lives. Just a reminder, if you want to ask any questions, there's the details to get involved. Let's think about storytelling in a bit more detail. The story chills our amygdala out, essentially. It stops our amygdala from panicking too much about whether we're going to die by the end of the presentation, and allows us to enjoy a story and enjoy the information. So your audience can listen harder, for longer, and engage more. So let's talk about how it's actually done. It's pretty simple, really. You can see the 3 icons there. It's about taking raw content, fashioning that into clear messages, and then putting that in a structured narrative so that it's a compelling story. But there's an art to getting it right. Let's think about how we do that. So first thing you've got to think about is your audience. It's harder than ever to grab your audience's attention and keep hold of it. because audiences don't just have the time or the patience that they're used to. No matter what presentation you go to, people will be on their phones these days, just answering emails or watching a bit of Netflix, who knows. So as storytellers, we need to work much harder to make sure that our stories are compelling, so they're listening. So you've got to really consider who you're talking to. You've got to take the time to figure out who your audience are and what makes them tick. Because if you can create a deep bond with them, and if you can pitch correctly to kind of the kind of language that they want to hear, and understand what they want at the end of the presentation, then you're onto a good excuse me, you're onto a good start. So the point, I guess what I'm saying is that you need to tailor your presentation for different audiences. You need to make sure that your content is valuable to your audience. And to do this, you can simply ask yourself two questions. First one is, what does your audience already know? Simple. And then the second one is, what do you want them to know by the end? And this essentially cuts out all the guff and just gets to the point. So let's look at that first question. What does your audience already know? It's basically telling you what to leave out. It's sometimes tempting to show a client you've done your research, that you know all about them, you know their history. It doesn't really matter because they know that already. So you're telling them what they know, you're wasting everybody's time, and you're burning through that valuable time where you could be telling them about the good stuff. Which brings us on to question two. What does your audience want to know? This is about just making it easy for your audience. If they're there to listen to you talk about a specific subject, they can get to the point, tell them about that subject. Explain why your products or services are essential to making their lives better, making their lives easier, making their lives faster, making their lives cheaper, whatever it is. If you can understand what their challenges are and present that back to them, they understand that you get them. And then you can bring in the solutions to that. So, oh, you know what my problems are, and you've got a solution for me, and you're better than competitors that offer something similar, then you just made their life very easy. That's that whole kind of sales process done. Any salesmen are going to be shouting at me for that, making it so simple. Continuing to talk about the audience though, you need to think about the language that you're going to use. You can use the same information, but present it in different ways for different audiences. So sometimes it's going to be formal, sometimes it's going to be friendly, sometimes you're going to have to go in quite corporate, sometimes it can be quite conversational. Sometimes it can be quite specialized, and other times you need to really go in at a very simple level so that everybody understands it. So if we had an example of putting together a pitch for a new product, a new type of fair trade coffee, let's say that you go into a major food and drink fair, and there are lots of other industry experts and retailers there. Our audience, from that, we understand they're basically coffee shop owners that might be interested in buying your special fair trade coffee. So when we think about what kind of language we should use, should it be formal or conversational? My recommendation that you can just go in conversational and friendly. These guys they're your people. You know, this isn't a high level end of year presentation to the board. You can talk about the daily realities that they have to live with and show that you kind of understand them on their level. But then when it comes to where to pitch it, you can go in at a high level. So the two things aren't mutually exclusive. You can be conversational, but still use all the industry terms and all the industry jargon, because they will understand it as well. And it really shows that one, you're on their side, and two, you understand their needs and their business. Okay, this is the storytelling part of stuff, and let's start right at the beginning with the structure. So everybody knows that a story has a clear, logical, coherent start, middle, and end. But you'd be surprised how many presentations I see that are a bit of a jumble. People don't really know where to start, don't really know where to end it, and then the stuff in the middle is just kind of lumped in. So we need to make sure that we've got that structure right. A lot of the time, I liken storytelling and presentations to cinema or films, because I've grown up watching thousands of the things. And you realize that people in presentations like simplicity. So we're talking about making sure that people can understand the presentation and basically reply back to you what it's been about in a simple sentence. So let's go for a film like Star Wars, just off the top of my head. you could, if you ask somebody after they've seen Star Wars for the first time, what was it about? Even if they're not a super nerd, they can say, well, it's about a farm boy, he meets a space wizard, he rescues a princess, and they save the galaxy. Start, middle, end, perfect. But then if you start thinking about films like Pulp Fiction or Memento, they're great films, but it's really hard to kind of, in a nutshell, explain what it's about because of all the different non-linear time frames. So with your presentation, make sure you've got a story, a start, a middle, and an end. So into storytelling. What does every story need? What's every story you've ever seen have in it? And the answer to that is very simply a hero. That's the easy bit. Who is the hero? It's not you as a presenter. You are not the hero. This is the first rule of storytelling for presentations. A lot of time people think, well, let's just talk about us. We'll talk about how great our products are. We'll talk about how long we've been in business. Doesn't matter. You're not the hero. Your company's not the hero. Your products and services are not the hero. It's not about you in this instance, sorry to say. We know as people, everybody self-identifies as the hero in their own story. So each individual person watching this now, you're your own hero. You know that. As the audience, you know that you're number one, which is why you get tweets like this. You are essentially the protagonist of reality. You're the hero in your own story. Because ultimately, people only care about themselves, and they always consider themselves to be the most important person in any given situation. So if you as the presenter aren't the hero, then who is the hero? It's the audience. Remember, this is all about your audience. They are the heroes in their own story. So if you can get out of the mindset of you are the hero that needs to solve everything, that gives you a really good kind of start in presentation storytelling. So let's have a think about heroes for a bit. So obviously we've got three of the main heroes in big franchises of recent years: Luke Skywalker, Frodo, Katniss. So they're the heroes, but they have a problem. They need help. They're all very young, very green. They can't win by themselves. They've got a quest to do. They don't necessarily even want to go on the quest. So they need some help. They need a guide or a mentor, which is somebody to empower them to overcome their challenges. And these are the interesting guys. These are the guides. So who guides Luke Skywalker? Yoda, or Gandalf, or Haymitch. It's that guide or mentor. That is you. You as a presenter are the guide to help the hero through their quest. So let's have a little think about those guides then. What do they have? They have three things over everything else. They have empathy, they have authority, and they have a vision. So let's start with empathy. What that means is quite simply that they care. They care what happens to a galaxy or to the Shire, and they understand the pain that the heroes are going through. So if you're a guide in front of your audience, you need to show that you understand your customers, that it's hard to choose the best coffee. Again, let's use that example in a sea of possibilities. Or they're frustrated that fair trade coffee seems to be more expensive, or they've been let down before by brands claiming they've got the best product. So if you can understand your audience, you're well on the way to becoming that guide. And secondly, you need to have authority. So that basically means you know what you're talking about. You've fought and defeated the Sith, or you've exiled Sauron. Whatever these wizened old mentors have done, it shows that they've got the chops to pull it off. But they don't brag about it. They never try and be the hero. It's about showcasing their experience and their capability, which again, as a presenter, this is what you should be doing. So talk about other customers that you might have helped. Talk about success stories that you've had. Basically show that you're experienced and you're capable. And then the final thing that a mentor has is the vision. So this is sight of the end result. So as a mentor, you're there to help your heroes through the maze because you know the benefits that are on the other side of it. So again, peace in the galaxy, or a unified Middle Earth, or an end to the capital's cruel reign. We need to show our heroes what happens when you do things a different way or a better way, whether that's cheaper, or simpler, or more productive, or more effective. Whatever the solution is, show them the benefits of that. Okay, let's get back to that structure. So once upon a time is a traditional way to start a story, particularly a fairy tale, in English at least, which got me thinking, what do other people do? What do other languages and cultures do? So these are just a few examples of some that I found when I did a great deal of research on this. And it turns out that it's all pretty similar. It's all about setting the scene and getting the lay of the land. And that's what Once Upon a Time does really effectively. Again, it goes back to understanding the audience. It's about understanding their business landscape. It's about setting a time and a place from the main protagonists right from the start. Again, from the audience's point of view. So it's showing that we understand their business landscape. We understand the things that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So again, if we think about coffee shop owners as our audience or our heroes, we'd start by explaining how we're familiar with their specific working practices, what the kind of junk you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But there's a problem, and this is the core to all storytelling. This is the sense of drama. This is the peril and the stakes, the highs and lows, the triumph and tragedy. It's the arcs that you've probably heard all about, because there's a problem with their everyday working routine. There are challenges and obstacles that they have to face. And maybe it's because it's inefficient or expensive or inferior. Whatever it is, personalize those challenges to your audience and show that you understand what those challenges are. If it was easy for the hero, it wouldn't be a very interesting film or presentation. So we don't put barriers in the way. There are barriers that exist, but we call those out and make it relatable. And you can think of these challenges or these obstacles or these barriers as the villains. And these are the most interesting guys, really. People love the villains in stories. You've got Vader there, you've got Sauron, you can think of Thanos, you can think of the Joker, all those kind of cool villains that rock up at the beginning of a film and start causing a real nuisance of themselves and making things difficult for our heroes. This is classic storytelling. So in our coffee example, what are the villains or the challenges that the coffee shop owners might face? Might just simply be that it's too expensive, or that it's actually of poor quality, so their customers aren't enjoying it, or that the growers aren't getting enough of a deal to live comfortably or to live sustainably, which is kind of the point of fair trade coffee. So what we're doing with the villains is identifying our customers' pain points. So we've got our heroes, we've got our guides, and we've got our villains. So now it's time to empower our heroes. They've got advice and they've got guidance from the mentors, which is us as presenters, but they're going to need help. They're going to need tools and they're going to need weapons. And this is where your products and services come in. This is the things that they need in order to defeat their villains. For every challenge that you've introduced, you need to explain how your product and service is a solution to help them as the heroes solve it. And when we've done that, we get to the fairy tale ending. Okay, so we've talked about the beginning and the middle. The middle bit is all your heroes and villains. They're kind of the meat of it. So now it's time to close the story. So as I say, this is as important as any other part. Sometimes you might find a presentation just ends and the story arcs aren't all wrapped up. It's like ending a film with 20 minutes to go. You don't know what's happened. You don't know what you should be thinking or doing. So we need to make sure there's an epilogue of the tale. This is where you go through any finer points, tying up those plot points to make sure that every character arc is complete. So let's talk about price points. Let's talk about how fair trade enterprise works, how it compares to other markets. What we need to do is make sure that every villain that we've introduced, every challenge that we've talked about has been defeated, and that we give every ally, every tool or product or service a time to shine. Summarize each of the points that we've made, each challenge and each of the way that the solution can solve them. So let's just clarify those three main points again. You are not the hero. I know you want to be, you're not the hero. You're the guide, and they're cooler anyway. And you're there really to solve your audience's problems. You're empowering them to overcome their own industry villains and save the day. And that's it. That's awesome. You've just told your story. There's a little bit more to put right at the very end, and that is when you've explained your story to everybody, make sure that you make it into a conversation by the end and offer any questions. And if you're going to do that, make sure you know your stuff, because if you invite questions, which I'm going to be doing very shortly, and you don't have the answer for it, you can not pull it off as well as you'd like. So let's hope I'm not going to taste my own medicine on that one. That is the end of my storytelling presentation, my webinar for now. I'm going to hand back to, there we go, to Dominic now, and answer any questions that you may have.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Chris. That was really good. I think my favourite was the fair retail ending.
Thanks very much. That's my one joke. I'm glad you enjoyed that.
That is very good. Webinars are very difficult because I'm sure there was people laughing at that. So it's
yeah, let's hope so.
Lovely. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go through some of these questions that we've got in, and so hopefully everybody can send a few more in just as we're going through these. Now, the one that's had the most likes so far is, would you recommend brainstorming for crafting storylines and planning the structure of stories? I guess, are there any good other good tips for the planning stage?
Yes. First off, yes, brainstorming is a very, very strong way to start. So what we tend to do as a company is myself and other creative storytellers will go to the clients and we'll take a load of post-it notes, which is the most interesting or the simplest and yet most effective way to get through this. And we just kind of drill deeply into the things that we've talked about today. So we ask first of all about their audience, who they are, what are their job titles, what are their kind of what are their fears, what keeps them up at night, how can we make that go away? So once we've got the audience sorted, then we start thinking about the challenges that those audiences have and then the solutions for it. And we do, I mean, this is a full day process really, but basically it's a case of putting all those post-it notes up and then rearranging them around. So you've got that structure, you've got that clear beginning and the landscape, and then you've got the clear, but there's a problem, which makes sure that people know that where the stakes are. And then after those problems, you show the solutions, and then you can talk about the benefits of those solutions. Storyboarding is one way to go. Quite often we transpose our PowerPoints into video for those specific projects. Then we tend to do storyboarding, which is very similar to the classic film storyboarding, which in itself is basically comic book writing and artistry. So we do a bit of that as well. But what we never do is just go straight into PowerPoint and just start writing. There's always post-it notes or scribbles or a load of just mental notes to make sure that we've got that structure right before we even open PowerPoint. Any other tips for the planning stage? I think I'd go back to the audience, really understand the audience and what their requirements are and work backwards from there, really. So think about the challenges and then the solutions that you can provide, and you're in a good place with that.
Thanks. You can always tell when somebody's cobbled together a PowerPoint at the last minute, can't you?
Absolutely.
That preparation in is key. Okay, on to the next most liked one. Do you have any tests you do on your presentations in order to make sure it's on the mark?
So from a from a general presentation point of view, in terms of how it works, there's over 100 tests that we do to make sure that it works on all the different platforms that you might be using it, and projectors and sound and all that kind of stuff. But from a storytelling point of view, I mean, we work very collaboratively with our clients. So there's quite a lot of back and forth. I'll tend to write an initial, what we call a skeleton deck, which is just the narrative without any design and sometimes without much content in there, to explain this is where we think we're going to go with this. Excuse me. Sometimes we will even kind of get test audiences in. Sounds a bit more grand than it is, but people who understand the audience better than anybody else, including members of that audience, just to kind of understand whether it's resonating with them, whether it's the kind of thing that they would like to sit through, basically, and whether it's done that kind of emotion changing by the end, and then we can tweak it from there. Really, that we may have had a bit too much emphasis on one place, or we need to draw the villains out a bit more. But yeah, it's rare. Well, we never just say, here's the final presentation, do that. We always make sure that it's absolutely fit for purpose before it leaves.
It's a good point. People often test their presentations on colleagues and things like that as they're doing it, but it can often be difficult to give that feedback, right? And usually it's your boss that's testing the presentation on you. So yeah, have you got any advice for people on how to to give that constructive criticism, but in a much more positive way, I guess?
Yeah, this is kind of verging towards the kind of presenting or public speaking, which I know is one of the biggest, like the second biggest phobia next to spiders or something. Nobody really likes it. What we do is try and empower the presenter so that they've got everything they need. So nothing can go wrong with it. So they've got speaker notes that the audience can't see, but they can, to make sure that they don't lose their way throughout the presentation. The build itself is kind of bulletproof, so that will never go wrong. There are a few tried and tested tips for kind of becoming more confident when it comes to presenting, and unfortunately you probably already know this. It's practice as much as you can. Do it in front of people who are going to be giving you honest criticism, and probably the hardest one, but one of the most effective ones, is record yourself and then watch it back. It's painful. It shows all your flaws very clearly, but it works. You destroy it afterwards, don't let anybody else see it, but I promise you that will get you presenting better for the next one.
Quality, thank you. Somebody said that they wanted to do the eBay test on the contents of the attic. I think that's definitely one excellent takeaway. As another one here, how would you recommend using a storytelling approach to help students learn concepts or skills?
I think there's kind of fundamental rules that apply to almost every single type of presentation. So I think it would be, again, understanding what are the barriers, what are the obstacles, what are the villains, as we mentioned, in understanding these concepts or skills, and then working backwards from there to say, if these are the problems that you've got, let's figure out how we can make that more simple. Let's put some heroes in place or some allies in place to make sure that we can overpower these challenges. Excuse me. And then thinking about the end goal again. So what do you want to get out of these courses? So another thing that we do at Buffalo 7 is we work on e-learning. So we bring the same kind of design and the same kind of high level kind of coding to make sure that people can undergo quite intense e-learning modules to get to learn more. So we think of, what do they want to get out of it? What's the end result, and what are the challenges to getting there? And then we put that kind of hero, villain, challenge, solution effect in there.
Sure, cheers. Does your structure or strategy differ for bigger or smaller audiences?
Not really. No, that's more, again, down to kind of presenter style. So there are ways to make a bigger audience feel more intimate, and likewise, sometimes a smaller audience kind of counterintuitively can put a bit more pressure on. But ultimately, every presentation needs to speak to every single individual in that room. So it's as if you're talking to one person, and if you've done your research at the beginning right, you know exactly who that audience member is, and it's tailored exactly to them. And it may be that there's 500 of exactly that same person, but that's fine. That's the way you do it. So make everybody in that room think that you're talking directly to them with their specific challenges, solve those challenges for them, and that's the structure I'd recommend.
And I think that's really good advice. I think you can often get carried away if you're preparing a presentation to take onto a big audience. You perhaps overthink it or think it should be somewhat different. But I like your advice there to kind of treat them all the same. A big one here. So you said our brains enjoy stories, releasing dopamine, etc. I think rather than that being true for all stories, it's fair to say we enjoy good stories that play to situations we understand and identify with. what tips would you have for presenters to lighten up, enhance their actual telling of stories to go from average to excellent? That's a nice question.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I'd say that almost any story is better than no story. I think if you've got a chart full of data, that is worse than having an okay story, which is not as good as having an excellent story, but I totally get the point. So in terms of tightening up and enhancing the telling of stories, you can get into, there are a few different styles of stories specifically for presentation. So there's the pitch, which is basically what we've been talking about today. There's other variations where it's kind of like the rags to riches story, which you get a lot of people talking about their lives go to that. I think this is a bit too detailed to kind of talk about here, but I'd recommend looking into different styles of storytelling for different styles of presentation. I'm just trying to give some tips to enhance the actual telling of stories. I think again, it all goes down to the whole point of stories is emotion, and it's making the audience care. If you can start with an emotional hook or something that makes them sit up and take notice, and then want to know how this story finishes, then that's kind of the best that you can have, make them care.
Cool. Okay, the very last one, because we're over time. There's been some really good questions in here. What tips would you recommend to make sure your story really amplifies across a large workforce or audience?
That's a good question. So in terms of a large workforce, I hope I'm not repeating myself too much, but it's understanding their specific requirements. It may be if you've got a large workforce or audience, if we think about a workforce for a minute, it may be worth thinking about, does everybody need to see the same presentation, or actually can we split that into maybe departments within a workforce, and do they have different challenges from each other? And if that's the case, should we have maybe 5 or 6 different presentations that talks about their specific challenges individually? If you try and kind of heal everybody's solutions in one, it may be that you're kind of weakening your key messages a little bit. So I would think about, for maximum emphasis, perhaps splitting those audiences to think about each one individually. Great.
Okay, I think there's probably a couple more in there, but we've run way over, and I know I'm keeping you from your day, Chris. So what I'd like to do is to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you very much to Chris for presenting. It was really, really interesting and great for me to kind of see that session again. There's loads of things I think I'll take away personally to go away when preparing my next presentation. Lovely. So without further ado, I shall let you all get on. Thanks very much again for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.